Beloved child, pause here for a moment, because what you are about to hear was meant to find you at a time when your heart may have been asking questions your lips never dared to speak. Do not rush past this moment. Something unexpected has shifted in the heart of the person you carry so deeply within your own, and the change did not happen quietly. It arrived like a sudden light entering a room they had kept dim for far too long. Your soulmate has been forced to face an emotion they thought they could control, hide, postpone, or explain away, and what happened inside them has changed the way they now see you. Heaven has watched the hesitation, the silence, the moments when they almost reached toward you and then pulled back, the nights when they tried to convince themselves that distance would make everything easier. But something has happened that they were not prepared for. Something touched the place inside them where your name has been living all along. And now the truth they were avoiding has become impossible to ignore. They love you more deeply than they allowed themselves to admit, and the thought of losing you has begun to feel far more painful than the fear of finally revealing what is in their heart. There is a reason this message feels different. It is not about a shallow moment of longing or a temporary wave of emotion. Something much deeper has been unfolding beneath the surface. Your soulmate has reached an inner crossroads. For a long time, they believed they had more time. More time to understand what they felt. More time to decide what they wanted. More time to heal what was unfinished within them. More time to gather courage before speaking the words they had buried. They thought the connection between you would simply remain there, waiting, unchanged, while they worked through every doubt and every fear. But recently, something interrupted that illusion. A moment occurred, perhaps quiet on the outside, perhaps almost ordinary to everyone else, but inside them, it landed like thunder. Suddenly they became aware that you are not someone they can take for granted. You are not a chapter that will remain open forever simply because they are afraid to turn the page. They realized that while they were standing still, your life was still moving. Your spirit was still growing. Your heart was still learning what it deserves. And for the first time, they truly felt what it might mean if one day they looked for you and discovered that you were no longer waiting in the same emotional place. That realization unsettled them more than they expected. Heaven saw the exact moment when their confidence cracked. They may have believed they understood you completely. They may have told themselves that no matter how much silence existed between you, some invisible promise would keep you close. Yet recently they noticed something different in your energy. You may not even realize you have changed, but you have. There is a quiet strength beginning to surround you. You are learning to stop chasing clarity from places that only offer confusion. You are becoming less willing to abandon your peace just to keep someone else comfortable. You are beginning to remember that genuine love should not require you to shrink your needs, question your worth, or live forever inside uncertainty. And your soulmate has sensed this shift. They may not have words for it, but they feel it. Something about you is no longer asking to be chosen. Something about you is becoming capable of walking forward with grace, even without all the answers you once desperately wanted. And that is exactly what awakened something powerful within them. Your soulmate did not expect to feel afraid of losing you because somewhere deep down, they had convinced themselves that your connection was too strong to disappear. They mistook spiritual depth for emotional permanence. They believed that because the bond felt unusual, meaningful, or difficult to explain, there would always be another opportunity. But love cannot survive forever on assumptions alone. The heart eventually asks for truth. It asks for presence. It asks for courage. And something happened recently that made your soulmate understand this. It may have been a conversation. It may have been something they heard from another person. It may have been a memory that unexpectedly returned. It may have been seeing someone else receive the kind of love they had been too afraid to offer you. Or it may have been something as simple as imagining your future without them in it. Whatever opened that door, once it opened, they could not close it again. The thought entered their mind, what if I lose this person because I waited too long? And from that question came another one that frightened them even more. What if they finally realize they deserve someone who is not afraid to love them openly? My child, understand how powerful that realization can be. Sometimes a person does not fully recognize the importance of a connection while they are focused on protecting themselves from it. Fear has a strange way of disguising love. It can make people appear distant when they are overwhelmed. It can make them quiet when they have too much to say. It can make them hesitate precisely because something matters more than they expected. This does not excuse every silence or every confusing action, but it explains why your soulmate has been fighting an invisible battle you could not see. They were not merely deciding whether they cared. They were trying to understand what would happen if they allowed themselves to care without limits. They were afraid of what loving you might require from them. Honesty. Vulnerability. Change. Responsibility. The courage to stop hiding behind timing, circumstances, old disappointments, or the opinions of people around them. But now something unexpected has changed the balance. Their fear of loving you is beginning to lose its power because the fear of losing you has become stronger. And this is where the story becomes more emotional than you know. There was a moment recently when your soulmate remembered something about you that they had not thought about in a long time. It was not necessarily one dramatic event. It may have been the way you once listened when no one else seemed to understand them. The kindness you gave without demanding recognition. The patience in your voice when they were emotionally distant. The way you noticed the things they tried to hide behind a smile. Perhaps they remembered a conversation where you made them feel safe. Perhaps they remembered the way you believed in them during a season when they could barely believe in themselves. Whatever memory returned, it carried more emotional weight than it did the first time. Because now they could see it differently. They realized that what you offered was not ordinary attention. There was genuine care inside it. And once they understood that, another truth followed. They may have received something precious from you without ever fully showing you how precious it was to them. That recognition brought regret, but not the hopeless kind. It brought the kind of regret that pushes a person toward change. Your soulmate began replaying certain moments, wondering what you must have felt. They remembered times when you needed reassurance and received silence. Times when your heart was probably asking, "Do I matter to you?" while their actions gave you no clear answer. Times when you were trying to understand a connection that they themselves were too afraid to define. They began asking themselves questions they had previously avoided. Did I make them feel alone? Did I make them doubt something that was actually real? Did my fear become their confusion? Did I assume they would always understand me even when I refused to communicate? These questions have not been comfortable for them. But comfort is not always where transformation begins. Sometimes heaven allows the truth to become uncomfortable enough that a heart can no longer remain unchanged. There is something else they are beginning to understand, and this revelation has gone even deeper. Your soulmate once believed that protecting their heart meant keeping emotional control. They thought that if they did not reveal too much, they could avoid disappointment. They believed that staying guarded would prevent them from being hurt. Yet they are discovering something strange. The walls they built to protect themselves are now the very walls that could separate them from the person they do not want to lose. This has created an intense inner conflict. Part of them wants to run toward you and say everything. Another part still fears what happens after the truth is spoken. Because once they admit how deeply they love you, they can no longer pretend this connection is casual. They can no longer hide behind uncertainty. They would have to acknowledge that you possess the ability to affect their heart in a way very few people ever have. And for someone who learned to survive by staying emotionally guarded, that kind of vulnerability can feel enormous. But something inside them is changing faster now. The old excuses are no longer satisfying them. The explanations they once used to justify distance are beginning to sound hollow in their own mind. They are becoming tired of pretending not to care when they care deeply. Tired of acting unaffected when your absence changes the atmosphere of their day. Tired of imagining conversations with you but never having them. Tired of replaying memories while telling themselves they should simply move on. They have discovered that suppressing love does not erase it. Silence does not automatically create peace. Distance does not always weaken what is genuine. Sometimes it exposes it. Sometimes a person needs to step away before realizing what presence meant. And your soulmate is now standing inside that realization. There have been moments when they nearly reached out emotionally. Moments when they may have opened a message, stared at your name, imagined what they would say, and then stopped themselves. They wanted the perfect words because they were afraid imperfect words would ruin everything. Yet there is no perfect sentence for a heart that has been hiding too long. There is only truth. They are beginning to understand that you do not need a flawless performance from them. You need sincerity. You need consistency. You need something real enough to stand outside fantasy. This is where heaven has been working quietly, not forcing an outcome, not removing anyone's free will, but placing mirrors before both hearts. You are being shown what kind of love honors you. They are being shown what kind of courage love requires. And the moment those two lessons meet, something powerful can happen. My beloved, there is a reason you have recently felt an unusual emotional pull toward yourself, toward your peace, toward your future. You may have noticed that some of the desperation you once carried is becoming quieter. That is not because your heart has stopped caring. It is because your spirit has become tired of measuring your worth by another person's readiness. You are learning something sacred. Love can matter deeply without becoming the only source of your identity. You can care about someone and still protect the dignity of your own heart. You can hope for reconciliation, communication, or deeper understanding while still moving forward with your life. You can love without chasing. You can remain open without becoming emotionally imprisoned by uncertainty. And the more you embody this truth, the more clearly everything around you begins to reveal itself. Your soulmate sees this even if they do not fully understand it. They have noticed that something about you feels more distant, not cold, not bitter, but stronger. There is a difference. Coldness pushes love away, strength stops begging love to prove itself. And that difference has shaken them. Because they know you are capable of loving deeply, but now they are realizing you are also capable of choosing peace. They are beginning to fear that one day your heart may no longer be available in the same way. This fear is not meant to manipulate you or make you wait. It is revealing something about them. They finally understand the value of what they could lose. The strange thing is, they thought this awareness would make them panic, but underneath the panic, something else is growing. Determination. That determination is still fragile. Do not imagine that every fear has vanished overnight. Your soulmate is still wrestling with old patterns. They still have moments when vulnerability feels dangerous. They still ask themselves whether you would believe them if they finally spoke honestly. They wonder whether too much time has passed. They wonder whether they have already damaged something they deeply wanted to protect. They wonder whether you would look at them and say, "Why now?" And perhaps that question frightens them because they do not yet know how to answer it. How can they explain that sometimes a heart understands the truth slowly, then all at once? How can they explain that they were not ignoring the connection but were afraid of its power? How can they explain that the very reason they became distant may have been because they were feeling more than they knew how to handle? This is why an unexpected event became so important. Something recently brought them face to face with the possibility of your absence. Maybe someone mentioned that you seemed happier. Maybe they heard something about a new direction in your life. Maybe they noticed your silence where they once expected your attention. Maybe a dream awakened them in the middle of the night with your presence still vivid in their mind. Maybe nothing external happened at all. Perhaps they simply woke up one morning and realized they were exhausted from pretending. But there was a moment, my child. A real emotional turning point. And after that moment, your soulmate could no longer comfortably return to the story they had been telling themselves. They began imagining the future. Not the romantic fantasy they may have imagined before, but the consequences of doing nothing. They pictured holidays passing. Seasons changing. Your life expanding. They imagined hearing someday that you had found peace somewhere else, that you had stopped asking questions about them, that another person had learned how to cherish the heart they were too afraid to claim. And that image affected them more deeply than they expected. They did not feel possessiveness alone. They felt grief. Because suddenly they understood that losing you would not simply mean losing attention or familiarity. It would mean losing the chance to know what might have happened if they had chosen courage. That is when love became impossible for them to deny. Not the kind of love that merely wants to be comforted. Not the kind that appears only when loneliness becomes inconvenient. Something deeper rose inside them. They began wondering what you needed from them rather than only asking what they needed from you. That change is significant. They started seeing the situation through your eyes. They remembered the uncertainty you endured. They remembered how many times you offered emotional honesty while they remained half-hidden. They remembered the moments when you may have felt foolish for caring. And instead of defending themselves, they began feeling compassion for your experience. This is one of the quietest signs that a heart is maturing. It stops asking only, "How do I feel?" and begins asking, "How did my choices make the person I love feel?" Heaven has been watching this transformation carefully, because true connection is not built on intensity alone. It is built on responsibility. The strongest emotional bond cannot survive forever if one person keeps carrying all the clarity. Love cannot remain permanently suspended between hope and confusion. Eventually, truth must enter. Your soulmate is beginning to see that. They know that if they want you in their life, feelings alone will not be enough. They must become visible through actions. They must communicate rather than expect you to read silence. They must meet vulnerability with vulnerability. They must stop expecting you to remain emotionally available while they remain emotionally hidden. This realization is frightening them, but it is also awakening the best part of them. And something else happened that they have told almost no one. During one quiet moment, your soulmate spoke your name to themselves and felt an emotion rise so quickly that they could not control it. They were not prepared for the heaviness. Perhaps tears came. Perhaps they simply sat in silence. Perhaps they looked away because even alone, the truth felt too exposed. But inside that moment, they admitted something they had been resisting: "I do not want to lose this person." Not because they fear being alone. Not merely because they miss your attention. They do not want to lose you because somewhere along the way, your presence became connected to a version of themselves they actually want to become. You made them want to be braver. You made them want to be more honest. You made them question whether the life they were settling for truly matched what their heart desired. And that is why the connection has been so difficult for them to dismiss. It is not simply that they love who you are. Something about loving you confronts them with who they could become. That is powerful, but it is also intimidating. When a person meets someone who awakens both tenderness and transformation, the connection can feel almost too important to approach carelessly. Yet ironically, fear of approaching it carelessly can cause someone to avoid approaching it at all. Your soulmate is beginning to recognize this contradiction. They can see that waiting for certainty has been creating the very uncertainty they feared. You need to hear this next part carefully, because it concerns you more than them. Do not shrink your life now that you know their heart may be awakening. Do not return to old patterns of waiting for every sign. Do not abandon the strength you have been building simply because you sense movement from their direction. The purpose of this message is not to place your happiness back into someone else's hands. It is to remind you that genuine love meets you where dignity lives. If your soulmate is truly preparing to move toward you, let them walk the distance that honesty requires. You have already spent enough time trying to understand what silence meant. Now allow truth to reveal itself through what is actually done. Because the most beautiful part of what is happening is that you are not the same person you were when this story began. You are more aware now. More discerning. more capable of recognizing the difference between potential and presence. There may have been a time when a few emotional words would have been enough to pull you immediately back into hope. Now your spirit is learning to ask deeper questions. Is this consistent? Is this honest? Is this peaceful? Does this person only speak when they are afraid to lose me, or are they prepared to show up when love requires patience, accountability, and courage? These questions are not walls around your heart. They are wisdom protecting what is sacred. Your soulmate somehow senses that they will have to meet this new version of you. That is part of what makes their next step so significant. They know that old approaches may no longer work. They cannot simply return with vague emotion and expect everything to become as it was. Something real must be said. Something real must be acknowledged. And here is where the mystery deepens, because they have already begun forming the words. They have imagined a conversation with you more than once. They have rehearsed pieces of it privately. They know there is one truth they must tell you first, because without it, nothing else they say will make sense. It is connected to why they pulled away. It is connected to the moment they first realized their feelings for you were no longer casual. And it is connected to something they once believed they had to hide in order to protect both of you. For a long time, they told themselves that keeping this truth inside was the safer choice. But after what recently happened, that secret has begun to feel heavier than the consequences of revealing it. They are starting to understand that what they considered protection may actually have created distance. They thought silence would prevent pain. Instead, silence created questions. They thought hiding their deeper emotions would keep the connection uncomplicated. Instead, it made everything more difficult to understand. And now they are considering doing something they once promised themselves they would never do, telling you the entire truth. But before that happens, there is another layer heaven wants you to understand. Your soulmate's fear of losing you did not appear because you threatened to leave. It appeared because something within them finally became honest. That distinction matters. Genuine awakening does not need manipulation. You do not have to create jealousy, force distance, or pretend not to care to make someone recognize your value. Your value existed before they understood it. Your love mattered before they knew how to receive it. Your presence was meaningful even when they were confused. Their realization does not create your worth, it merely reveals what was already there. And my child, there is freedom in understanding that. You are not waiting to become worthy of love. You are watching to see whether love is capable of meeting you truthfully. The next phase of this story depends not on how desperately either of you feels, but on what both of you are willing to do with those feelings. Your soulmate is approaching an emotional decision. They can continue hiding and risk watching this connection slowly become a memory, or they can choose vulnerability and allow you to finally see the part of their heart they guarded most carefully. One path feels familiar but empty. The other feels frightening but alive. And lately, they have been leaning toward the second. There was even a recent moment when they almost said too much to someone close to them. Your name entered a conversation unexpectedly, and their reaction revealed more than they intended. They tried to keep their voice steady, but emotion appeared before logic could stop it. The person listening may have noticed. Your soulmate attempted to change the subject, yet afterward they could not stop thinking about what had happened. Why did your name still affect them so strongly? Why did they feel protective when someone misunderstood the connection? Why did they suddenly want to explain who you really were to them? Why did the idea of someone reducing what you shared to something insignificant bother them so much? The answer frightened them because it was simple. You are not insignificant to them. You never were. And now they are reaching the point where pretending otherwise hurts more than admitting it. There is a conversation approaching in their inner world, perhaps soon in the outer world as well, where they will have to decide whether to remain the person who hides behind silence or become the person who finally speaks. Heaven is not telling you to predict the timing or build your life around that possibility. Keep living. Keep choosing peace. Keep becoming the person who does not abandon themselves for love. Yet know this, something unexpected has already happened. The emotional wall inside your soulmate has cracked. Light is entering places they kept closed. Memories they tried to quiet are returning with new meaning. Your absence is teaching them what your presence once gave. And their heart is finally asking a question their fear can no longer silence. What if this person was never asking me to be perfect? What if they were only waiting for me to be real? That question has changed everything. Because your soulmate knows there is one thing they have never fully told you. One thing that explains the strange distance, the hesitation, the moments when they seem to move closer and then suddenly disappear behind emotional walls again. It is not what you probably assumed. It is not simply that they did not care enough. In fact, the truth may be almost the opposite. There was a moment in the past when they realized exactly how much power this connection had over their heart, and what happened immediately afterward made them believe they had no choice but to hide it. They have carried that moment in silence. They have replayed it more times than you know. And now, after the unexpected event that awakened their fear of losing you, they are finally considering telling you what really happened that day. But there is one detail they still do not know how to confess, the detail that could completely change the way you understand every period of silence between you, and it begins with the exact night your soulmate realized they had already fallen far deeper in love with you than they ever intended. There was a night your soulmate has never truly forgotten. They may have tried to bury it beneath ordinary days, distractions, responsibilities, and all the explanations they created to convince themselves that what they felt for you was manageable, but the memory kept returning. It was not necessarily a dramatic night to anyone watching from the outside. There may have been no grand confession, no extraordinary event, no obvious sign that something life-changing was happening. Yet inside your soulmate, something shifted permanently. They suddenly understood that you had crossed an invisible boundary in their heart. You were no longer simply someone they enjoyed thinking about, someone whose presence brought comfort, or someone whose attention mattered. You had become someone whose absence could hurt. And when they recognized that truth, they became frightened by how deeply you had reached them. That was the beginning of the silence you never fully understood. Stay with this, because the reason behind it is not as simple as it appeared. Your soulmate had spent a long time learning how to keep certain emotions under control. Somewhere along their journey, they had begun associating vulnerability with risk. Loving someone deeply meant giving that person access to a part of themselves they could not easily protect. So when their feelings for you crossed from affection into something much deeper, their first instinct was not necessarily to run toward you. It was to regain control. They told themselves they needed space to think. They convinced themselves that perhaps the intensity would fade if they stopped feeding it. They believed a little distance would restore emotional balance. What they did not understand was that distance was about to reveal the opposite. Because once they stepped back, they began noticing you everywhere. A song could unexpectedly bring your voice into their mind. A familiar phrase could remind them of something you once said. They could be surrounded by people and still experience the strange sensation that someone important was missing. Sometimes they would see something funny and instinctively think about telling you before remembering the distance they themselves had created. Other times something difficult would happen, and their heart would automatically wonder what you would say. They began discovering that you had quietly become woven into their emotional world. They had not planned it. They had not deliberately allowed it. It had simply happened while they were busy trying to convince themselves they were still in control. Then came the moment that truly frightened them. They imagined you giving someone else the version of yourself they had grown accustomed to receiving. Your attention. Your tenderness. Your patience. Your laughter. Your ability to listen beyond words. Your willingness to notice the things others missed. It was only an imagined possibility, yet their emotional reaction surprised them. Something tightened inside them. For the first time, they understood that they did not merely enjoy having you in their life. They wanted a place in yours. But instead of immediately admitting that truth, they questioned it. Why am I feeling this strongly? Why does this person matter so much? Why can I not simply switch this off? Those questions became an invisible battle. And my child, there was something they never realized during that season. While they were trying to protect themselves from the depth of their feelings, you were experiencing their protection as rejection. Their silence looked like indifference. Their hesitation looked like uncertainty about you. Their attempts to control their own heart made your heart wonder whether anything between you had ever been real. Two people could be experiencing the same connection from completely different emotional positions, and neither could fully see what the other was carrying. That is why the recent unexpected event affected your soulmate so deeply. It forced them to revisit that original night. Suddenly they could see the pattern. They remembered how much they felt, how frightened they became, and how quickly they responded by creating emotional distance. Then they looked at everything that happened afterward and realized something painful. They had spent so much energy protecting themselves from losing control that they had nearly created the exact loss they were afraid of. This realization did not arrive gently. There was a moment when they became unusually quiet. Their mind began connecting memories they had previously kept separate. The times you reached toward them. The moments they wanted to answer more honestly but stopped themselves. The conversations that ended before the important words were spoken. The occasions when they sensed disappointment in you but pretended not to notice because acknowledging your disappointment would have required acknowledging their own feelings. Piece by piece, the entire story began looking different. And then they asked themselves the question they had been avoiding: What if they thought I never loved them? That question broke something open. Because whatever else has been complicated between you, there is one thing your soulmate does not want. They do not want you to look back on this connection and believe you imagined its emotional depth. They know their actions may have confused you. They know silence may have communicated something their heart never intended to say. They know you may have wondered whether you cared alone. And now they are beginning to understand how painful that uncertainty could have been. They started remembering the smallest details about you. Not merely the obvious things. They remembered subtle changes in your tone. The way you tried to sound fine when something was hurting you. The way your energy shifted when you felt misunderstood. The way you sometimes gave them another chance to speak when they had already let an important moment pass. They remembered kindness they had received from you without realizing at the time how rare it was. And as these memories returned, they began to understand that perhaps you had been showing love in quiet ways while they were waiting for some dramatic certainty before admitting their own. Something inside them whispered, "You knew." They did know. Perhaps not logically. Perhaps not with complete confidence. But somewhere beneath their fear, your soulmate always knew that what existed between you carried unusual emotional weight. That was exactly why they treated it so carefully. The tragedy is that they became so careful that they nearly became absent. Now they are questioning everything about that approach. They are beginning to realize that love cannot always be protected through silence. Sometimes silence protects fear instead. Sometimes refusing to say what matters does not preserve a connection, it slowly starves it. Sometimes waiting for the perfect moment is simply another form of avoiding the imperfect courage required right now. And your soulmate has started seeing that distinction. This is where something extraordinary begins happening within them. Their internal conversation is changing from, "What if I tell them and everything goes wrong?" to, "What if I never tell them and lose the chance forever?" Those questions may sound similar, but they lead in opposite directions. One produces hiding. The other produces courage. And courage is beginning to win. Do not misunderstand this as a promise that everything suddenly becomes effortless. Human hearts do not transform like switches being flipped. Your soulmate still has fears. They still wonder how you will respond. They wonder whether you have changed too much to receive what they want to say. They wonder whether your heart has grown tired. They wonder whether the emotional door they assumed would always remain open has begun closing. But instead of using those fears as reasons to remain silent, they are beginning to see them as reasons not to waste more time. Then something else happened. Someone around your soulmate said something about love, timing, or regret that struck them far more deeply than the person speaking could have known. It may have been an ordinary conversation. Someone could have been describing their own relationship, telling a story about someone they lost, or simply saying that certain people are not replaceable. But your soulmate heard those words differently. Their mind immediately went to you. For several seconds, they were not fully present in the conversation anymore. They were remembering you. And suddenly an uncomfortable thought appeared. What if I have been acting as though someone irreplaceable is replaceable? That thought stayed with them. Later, when they were alone, it became impossible to dismiss. They started thinking about the people they had known before you. They compared how those connections felt, not in a cruel or judgmental way, but emotionally. They realized there were things about you that they had never found elsewhere. A particular kind of understanding. A strange familiarity. The feeling that you could somehow see behind the version of themselves they showed everyone else. The ability to make them feel both comforted and challenged. You did not merely make them feel wanted. You made them feel seen. And being seen can be terrifying to someone who has survived by hiding parts of themselves. Your soulmate realized that perhaps this was another reason they pulled away. You were getting too close to truths they had not even admitted to themselves. When you asked simple questions, they sometimes felt as if you were touching wounds they kept covered. When you offered genuine affection, it challenged the belief that they had to earn love through performance. When you remained compassionate during moments when they expected judgment, it confused the defenses they had built. They did not know how to receive something that felt both safe and powerful. So they tested the distance. But distance did not free them. It revealed you. And this recent emotional awakening has made them realize that perhaps they misunderstood the entire connection. They thought their intense reaction meant they needed to escape it. Now they are wondering whether the intensity existed because something meaningful was asking them to grow. My child, there is an important distinction here. You are not responsible for healing another person simply because they love you. You are not required to rescue them from every fear. Their growth belongs to them. Their choices belong to them. Their courage must become their own. The deepest love still requires boundaries, mutual respect, honesty, and freedom. Heaven is not asking you to carry someone else's emotional work. In fact, the transformation happening within you has been teaching you the opposite. You have been learning how to love without disappearing inside another person. Perhaps there were times when you interpreted their silence as evidence that something was wrong with you. You wondered whether you were too emotional, too available, too caring, too hopeful, or somehow not enough. You may have mentally replayed interactions, searching for the exact moment when everything changed. You may have asked yourself what you could have done differently. But the truth you are being invited to consider is far simpler. Some of their distance was never about your worth. It was about their capacity to face what they felt. And those are two completely different things. This understanding does not erase the impact of their choices. It does not mean you should ignore inconsistency. It simply releases you from the burden of believing every silence was a verdict on your value. Sometimes people retreat from what matters because they are frightened by what it awakens inside them. The important question is not merely why they retreated. The important question is what they choose once they recognize the pattern. Your soulmate is now approaching that choice. And this time something is different because they are no longer thinking only about confessing feelings. They are thinking about what comes after the confession. That is the revelation they did not expect. At first they imagined that telling you, "I love you," would be the hardest part. Now they understand those words are only the beginning. If they truly do not want to lose you, they must show you what those words mean. They must learn how to remain present when vulnerability becomes uncomfortable. They must speak when their old instinct tells them to disappear. They must become consistent enough that you do not spend your days interpreting mixed signals. This realization has made their feelings more serious. They are not merely thinking, "How do I get this person back?" They are beginning to ask, "How do I become someone who can protect what we build?" That question carries a different energy. And it has led them toward a decision they did not expect to make. Your soulmate has been considering revealing something personal about themselves that they have kept hidden, not because it is frightening or dangerous, but because it exposes the emotional reason behind many of their choices. It is something connected to an old experience that taught them to expect disappointment whenever they became deeply attached. Somewhere in their past, they learned that caring too much could leave them powerless. Whether through heartbreak, abandonment, broken trust, or simply watching a relationship around them fall apart, they developed a quiet rule: never need someone so much that losing them could destroy your peace. Then they met you. And suddenly that rule became difficult to follow. The deeper they cared, the more their old defenses returned. They confused emotional independence with emotional isolation. They tried to convince themselves that needing nobody was strength. Yet now they are learning that genuine strength can also mean allowing someone to matter while trusting yourself enough to survive vulnerability. You became the person who challenged an old belief they did not even realize they carried. That is why this connection has felt like more than romance to them. It has forced them to confront themselves. And there is something else. During the unexpected event that triggered all of these realizations, your soulmate believed for a brief moment that they might truly have missed their chance with you. Whether they saw something, heard something, sensed your emotional withdrawal, or simply confronted the passage of time, the possibility felt real. For those few moments, they imagined there would be no future conversation. No opportunity to explain. No moment when they could finally look at you and tell you why they behaved the way they did. No chance to say, "You mattered more than I showed you." And that imagined ending hurt. It hurt enough to expose the truth. They love you deeply. But the most important part is what happened immediately afterward. Instead of merely sitting in sadness, something inside them rebelled against the idea of allowing the story to end through silence. They felt an unfamiliar determination. They realized they would rather risk being honest and receive an answer they cannot control than remain hidden forever wondering what could have happened. This does not mean they know exactly how to approach you. They have imagined several versions. In one, they begin casually and slowly move toward the truth. In another, they stop pretending entirely and tell you everything at once. Sometimes they imagine apologizing first. Sometimes they imagine asking whether you would even be willing to hear them. And sometimes they picture themselves saying nothing elaborate at all, simply admitting, "I was afraid, and I handled that fear badly." That sentence has been haunting them. Because it feels true. They were afraid. Not necessarily of you. Not even necessarily of love. They were afraid of becoming emotionally dependent on an outcome they could not control. Yet love has now taught them that control was never the point. Connection requires two free hearts choosing one another, not one heart controlling whether loss is possible. And you are learning the same lesson from another direction. You are learning that you do not have to control whether they choose you. You only have to remain honest about what you deserve. You can receive love when it arrives sincerely without building your entire identity around whether it arrives at all. This is why both of you have been changing at the same time. They are learning courage. You are learning self-respect. They are learning to speak. You are learning not to chase words. They are learning that love requires presence. You are learning that presence must be mutual. And somewhere between those lessons, the possibility of something healthier is beginning to emerge. But my beloved, the story is not finished. Because there is a reason your soulmate suddenly became afraid of losing you now rather than months ago. Something specific happened. Something they saw or discovered made them realize your life might be moving into a new chapter without waiting for them. At first they tried to dismiss it. They told themselves they were overreacting. But later that same day, they returned to it. And when they did, they noticed one detail they had missed the first time. That detail changed the entire meaning of what they had seen. Suddenly the situation was no longer only about whether you might move forward without them. It became about something your soulmate had misunderstood about you for a very long time. They realized that while they believed you were waiting helplessly for their decision, you had actually been doing something completely different. You had been growing. Quietly. Without announcing it. Without trying to make them jealous. Without needing them to witness every step. You had been rebuilding parts of yourself that their uncertainty once affected. And when your soulmate recognized that, they experienced two emotions at once. Pride. And fear. Pride because somewhere inside them, they always knew there was extraordinary strength in you. Fear because they realized the stronger you became, the less likely you were to accept a connection that required you to abandon your peace. This changed the question in their mind. It was no longer, will they still love me? They suspected some part of you might. The new question became, even if they love me, will they still choose me? That distinction shook them. Because love and choice are not always the same. You can love someone and still choose peace. You can love someone and still require honesty. You can love someone and refuse to remain trapped inside endless uncertainty. Your soulmate finally understood that your love was never permission for them to delay forever. And that realization pushed them closer to action than anything before it. There is now one conversation they know they cannot avoid much longer. They want to explain the night everything changed inside them. They want to tell you why they became distant precisely when their feelings became strongest. They want you to know that some of the moments you interpreted as indifference were actually moments when they were overwhelmed by emotions they did not know how to express. But they also know explanations are not enough. They know they may need to apologize. They know you may have questions. They know you may not immediately trust everything simply because they finally found the courage to say it. And surprisingly, they are beginning to accept that. Because this awakening is teaching them something important. Loving you means respecting your response, not controlling it. They cannot demand forgiveness. They cannot demand another chance. They cannot demand that your heart return to where it once was. They can only bring the truth. and allow you to decide what that truth means for your life. That is what makes what is coming so emotional. For perhaps the first time, your soulmate is considering approaching you without armor. Not to impress you. Not to manipulate you. Not to create urgency. But to let themselves finally be known. Yet there is still one piece they have not decided how to reveal. It concerns the unexpected event itself. Because what triggered their realization was not simply the possibility that you were moving forward. Someone said something about you. Your soulmate initially believed it. And for a brief period, what they heard made them think they had lost you emotionally. But then they discovered that what they had been told was incomplete. There was another side. A detail nobody had mentioned. And when your soulmate finally learned that detail, their entire reaction changed. Instead of feeling defeated, they became emotional. Because they realized you had made a choice they never expected. A choice connected to them. A choice that showed your heart had understood something about their silence even before they understood it themselves. But your soulmate was not the only person who discovered this. Someone else heard about it too. And that person knows exactly how deeply your soulmate feels about you. Now your soulmate is facing a new decision. Remain silent and allow someone else to shape the story, or finally come directly to you and reveal everything before another misunderstanding has the chance to grow. They have almost made their choice. But before they come forward, there is one truth they need to confess, the truth behind what happened on that original night, the reason they disappeared emotionally when they wanted to move closer, and the promise they secretly made to themselves about you afterward. And my child, when you discover what that promise was, you may finally understand why your soulmate has never truly been able to let this connection go.